Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, clapping already. It must be. Is there a developer in the room? Thanks, mate. Yeah. All right. So today I'm going to be talking, cramming a little bit of an hour presentation in pretty much 10 minutes. So I'm going to focus on just a couple of the key initiatives which really distinguish Aura and are really starting to set the bar for development on the coast and in southeast Queensland, which we're sort of quite proud of. I've been involved in the project for coming on 14 years now and worked with a lot of you in the room here, which is great because the involvement of community in our projects is extremely important to ensure that we're leaving positive legacy outcomes to protect the natural environment, which we all love to live here on the Sunshine Coast. So I'm going to touch on just a little bit of background about Aura, but most of you sort of know a little bit about that, I'm assuming. Talk about a bit of our biodiversity planning, which is important, and then also touch on some of the integrated water management practices, which is critical when we're talking about developments on the Sunshine Coast and how we protect our natural waterways. So Aura is a city building project for 50,000 people. Sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of people coming to the coast, and more now because of what's happened over the last 12 months. You know, we're seeing an influx of people coming in from all over Australia because of the great lifestyle that we have. So as developers, as community builders, we have a responsibility to ensure that we can provide and protect the environment which we all love and why we all came here for to protect. So 50,000 people, 20,000 dwellings, 19,500 direct jobs. As I said, it's a city building project, it's big. And it's something that's being built over the next 30 odd years. It has everything you'd expect in a city where you've got lots of sport and recreational opportunities, a massive town centre, People's Place, train station, sporting stadium, and of course an array of residential properties to provide a range of choices for people who are moving to the Sunshine Coast. One of the key aspects, I'll just actually see if I can go back. One of the key aspects of the master plan, we worked on this for quite a while with a lot of the stakeholder groups of the Sunshine Coast, was how is it that you're able to create a community which is able to protect those environmental values? So whilst we've got 2,340 hectares, which is a large block of dirt, ostensibly cleared, old farming practices across the land, pine plantation, everything was cleared. 3 creeks running straight into eventually the Pumicestone Passage. So one of the things which we sort of created here was 700 hectares, nearly a third of the site dedicated towards conservation rehabilitation. And the important thing about that is then how you're then creating your buffers to your creeks and really trying to focus on that biodiversity, that connectivity, and particularly when you're looking at impacts of climate change, how you're able to make those environments resilient to enable species to move through the landscape. When we went through the master planning process, we did a lot of workshops and we made actually a lot of changes through the engagement with the local community. And a couple of key things I'll just highlight, you can read them on the list, but we actually changed the master plan and added in another 135 hectares or so, 35 hectares, which was developable land into conservation network. That's a very tough conversation to have with the board because there's obviously a bit of value associated with that. But we saw that as an important win for the environment because it was identified that even though the landscape was heavily degraded, denuded, that there was the potential for refugia for acid frogs, a really threatened species on the Sunshine Coast, particularly in the coastal habitats. A couple of other important things was research with universities of how we could really start to promote and look at new opportunities in relation to biodiversity, particularly with frogs. And then one of the things that we actually committed to working with the stakeholders is that we do a regular check-in. We'd be open and honest in our communication, we would listen, and that we would then take on board comments as much as we can and see as we build the project, we can actually make changes through it. So we actually have a bit of an adaptive management philosophy where we do evolve based on our learnings through the project and also about new ideas and technologies that might come to hand. One of the things that we were challenged with originally from the stakeholder groups was, hey, Stockland wants this to be an exemplar sustainable community. So, okay, how are you going to do that? So we put our hand up to put it through the rigorous Green Star accreditation project through the Green Building Council of Australia. So about 1,000 professionals actually put this together. It's the most independent rating tool in the country. We managed to achieve the full 6 stars, which puts us in international world leadership status. And last year we actually had to get that audited and we ended up recertifying to maintain that 6-star rating, which is great. And the thing about sustainability for us is about not necessarily the bolt-ons, it's really what's embedded within the DNA of the community. So the couple of key initiatives which are really standouts, you drive down the Bruce Highway and you can actually see the white roofs. We actually had a comment from someone the other day who came up Victoria saying, what is that place there? Why are all the white roofs? But it's a really important thing where we can actually specify in our covenants mandating a solar absorbency from our roof perspective, which impacts and improves the heat island effect and climate resilience within the community, making it cooler, making it energy efficient. Now that's actually been a change in terms of some of the roof providers because they've had to actually change some of their colours and make more products available. But it's a way which as developers we can influence that as part of the development process. The other one, for those that have been to Aura, which has been a bit of a game changer for us, is our bike veloways. And that's great because what we've done is we've dedicated off-road cycleways throughout the community, linking all the major schools and the parkways. And we've got at the moment over 50% of school kids riding to school. On the Sunshine Coast, I've heard figures such as 12 to 16%. So by being able to ride to school, and you see it every morning, you've got school children, their parents, they're using those bike veloways. What that does is promotes healthier, active living choices for families, which is a big driving card for us. So they're just a couple of the sustainability initiatives which we're seeing massive benefits for the community. One of the key challenges that we had when we developed the site was the site was cleared. We had rills and furrows as a result of the pine plantation. In 2011 and 12, we had about the record rainfall. I think it was the record in 30 years. And we ended up with a proliferation of acid frogs across the site. It was like, great time to go and do studies. So we've embraced that challenge. So what we're doing is recreating 152 hectares of acid frog habitat across the site. You can sort of see the green areas there. But what we've really looked at is how we can look at our conservation areas to ensure that we're protecting those habitats. And as I mentioned before, being able to create these stepping stones, these habitats through the landscape that species can move through. So this map shows our riparian zones, our frog buffers, our riparian zones, and also the broader conservation land that provides greater protections to the creeks and also the Pumice Passage. One of the challenges that developers have, particularly when you're looking at a governance framework, is the buffers to creeks. Quite often you will get, here's a 100 metre wide buffer and that's what you've got to achieve. One of the ways we've tried to approach this is more from performance-based outcome perspective. What actually are we trying to achieve? So you've obviously got the conservation outcomes you're trying to achieve, and then you've got the development outcomes where you're trying to achieve that actual balance. What we've actually achieved through at Aura, through that planning, again working with industry experts and stakeholders and community groups, is looking at creating our habitats and ensuring that we can get our frog ponds and our frog habitat and our stormwater habitat to coexist. And not just that, but looking at ways in which we can actually get the development interfaces to back onto the conservation zone, so we've got appropriate management measures for bushfire management and mosquito management. And whilst we might have wider conservation buffers in some areas of over 250 metres, we've actually provided a really good outcome where we're getting that right balance between the environment and the conservation lands and minimising impacts such as weed ingress from people dropping lawn clippings over fences. We don't have that risk or that impact. One of the key success stories for us is creating frog ponds throughout the landscape, and we've pioneered new technologies, and we are continually looking at new techniques of how we're able to create those ponds. We actually do them in advance of construction, and that's to ensure we can recreate the habitat before it's actually disturbed. And we've actually found that we've been getting success criteria, or the key performance indicators for water quality, pretty much within 1 to 2 weeks after doing the works, which is great. So investigating slabbing techniques and different benching techniques to almost recreate those rills and furrows, but putting those through the landscape, it's really helped with that success criteria. And you can see this at the top right photo is where we sort of started early on, and a couple of years later, the bottom photo on the left was that same pond and the vegetation around it, where we're actually getting, successful recruitment of Wallam sedge frogs, which is the first time in the country that artificial frog ponds have actually been able to create that. So that's been a great win for us. The other thing is how we're managing with our community groups. So we do Well Wetland Day every year. We've done it for 5 years, and being able to get international experts who work with us to actually work with school kids to turn it into a living laboratory. The other key aspect for us is water quality, and we've got a responsibility to manage the Palmerstone Passage, ensure that when you're actually creating impervious surfaces, you're able to manage that environmental flows off the site. We've got an array of initiatives which we've implemented, and a couple of the key things are mandating PE welded sewer, so you haven't got groundwater infiltration, but then a treatment train of water sensitive urban design. We've mandated rainwater tanks throughout the community, which all assist with managing that water quality. So from a construction perspective, it's important, we've looked at trialling high efficiency sediment basins, initiatives which came to us through community groups. They were trialled originally in New Zealand. You can see in that photo there, dirty water coming in, really, really clean water going out. Can't be more technical than that. And it's actually really started to pioneer and change some of the legislation in Queensland, and we've adapted that methodology. The good thing is that the cumulative impact, we've got really, really clean water coming off the site from a construction perspective, able to manage those waterways. And then from an operational perspective, as I touched on before, we've got the rainwater tanks, we've got the rain gardens, we've got inline wetlands and bioretention basins as well. The final slide I've got is we're investigating stormwater harvesting. Now, this is something which we don't have to implement, but we see this as a bit of a regional water security initiative that is a potential to be investigated compared to others. We've got extremely good quality water coming off the site. Can we actually harvest that through our wetlands and tip those into our dams to come back as potable water for our communities? Initiatives to be able to respond to the growing urban pressures we have with population growth, and the alternatives, which I think will be touched on by Jane Louise, are things like desal plants and those sorts of things. So can we actually be a bit smarter with the way we use our water? Can we be smarter with our communities that are already using better than best practice from a water sensitive urban design perspective, and be smarter in the way we use that precious water resource to ensure that, again, we're protecting our natural resources, our great lifestyle here on the passage, on the coast. Thank you.
There are lots of questions for Mark, as you can imagine. Some of them he answered before he even knew that they were questions, which was fortunate.
Give me an easy one.
Well, one is just a bit of clarification. You said that there were rainwater tanks. Is that on every single new house? Or to what extent do you have rainwater tanks?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When we started the community, we mandated tanks on every single block. And we had 5,000 litre tanks for what we call detached lots, which is a lot above 250 square metres, or a lot effectively that's not sort of attached. And then we had 3,000 litre tanks for smaller attached properties. What we've recently done through a lot of water quality modelling is that the tanks for the 3,000 litres wasn't really adding that substantial difference to water quality mitigation treatment. And the other thing, it was actually adding too much of a cost impost to residents who are looking at affordability, because they had to put those underground, and then there's no real guarantee that they're going to be maintained if they can't see them and know whether they're working or not. So decisions like that, as I mentioned before, through adaptive management, have been implemented, and it's a pragmatic way of ensuring that you're not compromising the environment through modelling, but then you're also able to fulfil the customer needs and provide affordable housing and choices that the customers do want.
So just to clarify even more, what percentage of new houses would have rainwater tanks now in the end?
I'd be estimating, but I would probably say upwards of 60, 70%.
Okay, yeah, that's not too bad. I'm just going to ask another question quickly. Is there much chance of such developments having mature street trees above roof height, so there's some kind of tree canopy to really reduce on-ground urban temperatures?
I mentioned before about the role of the roofs, and the role of the trees is also critically important as well. We've actually, through our master planning, look at tree architecture. So we look at the types of species which actually grow really, really well in our environment. One of the things that I do with our landscape architects will say, go and drive around the old areas. And sometimes you can see figs that were planted 15 years ago and they're still the same size that they were planted. But then you can see other native species which can grow really, really tall, really, really quickly, that are more suited to the natural soils and the environment. So we do focus on that quite carefully, and we do want to ensure that we've got that balance right of getting trees up which are quite high, which can get that shade, which also don't damage the infrastructure of the road and the paving networks. But it is important aspect to ensure that we can get that canopy up, and we can provide those shadeways for people to walk under, and also provide a cooler community. And that's generally what a lot of pretty much all the developers will do. Hamish, you'll do that at your community as well.
Thank you very much.
All right.